Welcome to another episode of Get Wisdom. I'm Brian Kelly, along with Get Wisdom founder and director, Carl Mollison. Carl, this week's episode is the widespread epidemic of dark spirit sabotage. Boy, that's really laying it out there.
Well, and as we'll be discussing, it's a well-deserved title. As a channeler of creator of all that is, I ask about all kinds of things. I'm interested in many subjects, the workings of the universe, metaphysics, quantum physics, healing especially. But things keep coming back around to the existence of dark spirits in our midst as attachments in people, manipulating them from within. This has been talked about since the scriptures. It's all in the Bible and the Quran. There are dark spirits. This is a cohort of fallen angels. They're still around. They're still a scourge. So we're going to touch base again with this topic and get down to the nitty-gritty. And people, I think, will be quite shocked at how pervasive this is and insidious.
Indeed. Let's get into it. You asked creator, a listener asks, how many spirit meddlers exist? If 90% of 7 billion humans have on average 7 spirit meddlers each, that's 44 billion spirit meddlers in humans alone.
All right, and this is what Creator says about this question. You have asked about this figure before, and we have cautioned that it is not wise to give an estimate here because it will indeed seem daunting from the human perspective, and that is an undesirable negative consequence of indulging your questioner's curiosity. You can see from the simple calculation made in the question that it will be a large number, given that it is not only humans, but 3 other civilizations of extraterrestrials who are also heavily infested. But that number in and of itself is of little significance. What matters is the ratio of divine beings capable of countering their moves and their influence. We have made clear previously there are ample numbers of angelic beings alone who can handle any contingency, and they are being pressed into duty to work on the human healing enterprise and will be up to the task because the limitation is not on the divine end. It is on the human end, simply having sufficient of their membership providing a clear intention. This is desirable, and that is a matter of awakening greater numbers and persuading them to apply themselves to prayer and healing efforts, as with the Lightworker healing protocol.
You know, I remember you talking that it was always difficult to get a precise number of how many dark spirits there are. And it's mentioned again in this channeling that that's an issue. We don't want to give that number out. But there was a question asked somewhere along the way of what is the ratio of good to bad? And we were told it's more than 1 million to 1 good to the dark spirit. So that's a glimmer of hope right there.
Yes. But the key is people aren't asking for help. Hello world. This is a call to action.
It ain't going to matter if we don't ask them.
Exactly. This is a do-it-yourself world. We're in charge here. We have free will, free agency, and that means we've got to learn the ropes. We've got to figure things out enough to know there's something wrong and ask for divine help. That's our birthright. That's our heritage. That's our lifeline. But if we ignore it, if we turn away, we can get lost. And that's what's going on right now. Too many people have turned away.
Indeed. You asked Creator, are the spirit meddlers restricted to our free will galaxy, or do they exist throughout the universe?
And Creator tells us the spirit meddlers are creatures of your galaxy alone. And that is because the other realms are off limits to them and their energies. This is seen to by Creator. They are a product of the free will experiment, which is localized to your galaxy for safety reasons. So you need not worry about the vast arena inhabiting endless hordes of these beings, such that you will be in a constant threat over and over and over because the numbers are too daunting to cope with from a relatively small number of human beings compared to the vastly greater number of other life forms that could harbor such pests. Even though the numbers overall are disproportionate, that does not factor in the power of the divine when brought to bear on behalf of human in response to requests for healing. This is a doable task.
Yes, and this basically dovetails what we were saying just earlier, that the divine can handle this. That's not the issue. The issue is us asking.
That's right. And meanwhile, these dark spirits are having a field day with us. They cause all kinds of problems. So we're going to give you some examples to illustrate how this manifests without people even being aware of it.
All right. You ask Creator, to what extent is the heart problem of AFib, atrial fibrillation, caused by deep subconscious emotional triggers, spirit meddlers, or karma?
Okay, most physical illness is caused by karma, but spirit meddlers can interfere with physical function also. And there's a bunch of things they do. This is what Creator says about AFib. This is a nerve phenomenon and not caused by stress per se. As such, it is not at all unusual that spirit meddler attachments find a way to manipulate the nerves of the heart to cause such abnormalities. They can manipulate many nerves in the body, and the individual host's vulnerabilities will determine how this manifests, if at all. So 90% of individual host vulnerabilities, so 90% of cases of atrial fibrillation are caused by spirit meddler attachments on board the person. This is most unfortunate, as this condition is quite a scourge and can be most distressing and debilitating. But that is the nature of these beings, that they seek to cause harm, and it gives them extra delight when they can perturb their host. It will add to the person's fear, and the emotional intensity accompanying attacks brings in extra energy for the spirit attachments, and that is their ulterior motive, to torment their host into calling on the divine for more energy to cope. And that benefits the parasitic spirit meddler attachments.
You know, that line of tormenting so that we call in more energy from the divine, that's actually kind of a new twist on this whole dynamic. It's a new understanding for me anyway. It's interesting.
Well, we live at the behest of the Lord above. We're given life force energy on a continual basis from the divine. That's the deal. And that is how we live. And when that life force energy stops, we stop, and our physical body dies. So there's a back and forth, a control mechanism going on behind the scenes. But this scourge of perturbing physical function and causing mayhem is an old trick and a strategy that they use to cause problems again and again and again.
Indeed.
So, and this is no small thing. I mean, even this one condition, there is 3 to 6 million people in the U.S. suffering from atrial fibrillation. And I think there was a 2013 study worldwide estimating there's 33 million people who suffer this condition, 90% of whom could be free, having a spirit removal.
Wow, that is really something to think about. Carl, you asked Creator, similar to the situation in professional sports where onboard spirit meddler attachments can cause errors at just the worst time during a game to change the course of things, are serious surgical errors and medical errors in general as frequent as they are because of spirit meddler interference with medical personnel intending to cause harm?
Okay, well, here's another window into how these beings think and what they do. Creator says, this is a brilliant insight, and this is very much the case. One would think in the medical setting there would be a very intense oversight and personal scrupulousness, even in carrying out routine duties, because they often involve necessary steps for care, and any neglect through errors could have disastrous consequences. For example, giving the wrong medication to a patient who is in the same room but in a different bed is a classic known to hospital care and still happens in institutions despite more and more sophisticated safeguards to ensure accurate patient identification for all such procedures. This can be arranged through spirit meddler manipulation of the caregiver to have a lapse in judgment or memory, a moment of confusion, or fogging the mind to simply skip over a step or be distracted in a way to cause this to happen. And then an error is made without the person realizing it. This is the largest factor in the cause of errors in professional settings, where the errors will have significant consequences before they are caught and changes made, if that is even possible. So the aggregate consequences of this meddler mischief are enormous because it contributes materially to making the U.S. healthcare system the leading cause of death in the United States of America. And this is mirrored all around the world where Western healthcare is practiced. We have a follow-up question about this as well, because this came to my attention that someone had a friend who died unexpectedly as a consequence of routine surgery, died in the hospital the next day. And it was a little bit a mystery. The family, of course, was shocked, but nothing was mentioned about anything untoward. And so I asked Creator, was the unexpected death of my client's friend, who had a routine knee operation due to spirit meddler interference, compromising something critical? And this is what Creator said. This, in fact, is what happened. You knew this intuitively from the beginning in hearing the news and asked about it previously, but did not probe to ascertain a particular culprit. You were content with the admonition to let the sleeping dogs lie, that it would only harm the family further to have their worst fears confirmed, that it was a needless death through negligence. So nothing would really be gained, and especially so because our word would not be considered sufficient proof in a court of law, and this would have been quite disturbing and costly in the end, only cementing the pain in further. But that is not to say blame could not be assigned with respect to who was responsible for what happened, if only for you to know for the record and to learn from it and teach others, while shielding the identity of the victim being a prudent practice as always. So we can state unequivocally that this was a spirit meddler interference with the mind of the doctors in the operating room to cause a series of errors. And that is what ultimately ended up costing his life, and is exactly analogous to what they can do in many, many settings. For example, causing 30% of automobile accidents by distracting the drivers at critical moments when full attention on the road ahead is needed to avoid a mishap. Spirit meddler attachments in caregivers cause fully 50% of medical errors. The rest is owing to the sheer complexity of the medical care panorama and the stressful working conditions, and often personnel being overworked and suffering fatigue. This state of affairs illustrates quite effectively the value of the Lightworker healing protocol and what it can accomplish by creating safety from such mishaps as one of many, many potential benefits. So I find this quite shocking because medical errors are one of the big three sources of morbidity and mortality that makes healthcare such a danger. You know, it's a necessary evil. I'm not anti-medicine, but it's invasive. They do a lot of things that have a downside, and things can go wrong. And when they do, that's when unexpected tragedies happen.
This should be part of every insurance plan, Lightworker healing protocol.
Well, I was telling my wife last night, if hospitals hired me to clear their personnel on a regular basis, their outcomes would improve and they would be shining compared to other institutions. And the success of their procedures, the overall general well-being of the people that they help. But, we're not there yet. There needs to be a broader awareness of this reality.
You asked Creator, are spirit meddlers routinely able to talk directly with the deep subconscious mind of their host, or is this restricted to those who have greater intuitive ability and can pick up their spirit voices intuitively?
All right, this is an interesting one because it explains the mechanism of this mischief. Creator says, indeed, this happens on a regular basis. So there is very much a state of siege ongoing within every person that harbors spirit attachments. This, in fact, is the greatest single risk they pose because they can carry out a campaign of mind manipulation and mind control when they gain an upper hand. They are clever, they understand humans, and they are relentless in seeking to downgrade and diminish the person and their vibration. It is like a state of siege with having a bully on board that never quits. It is always second-guessing. It is always seeking to undermine and question and denigrate the person. Much of the self-hatred people exhibit with their doubts and fears and anxieties, the negative judgment of the self, is learned from the spirits on board who tell them these very things day in and day out on a deep subconscious level. This is a major key to understanding human behavior and the problems faced by so very many with self-esteem. This, as well, is the reason bullying is such a powerful correlation with psychosis. The mind can only withstand so much punishment and will find ways to retreat if it can no longer cope in a healthy way. This is the most important reason to do spirit removal from people, as its effects are so widespread and so consequential in a negative sense for undermining human happiness and well-being.
Wow. The whole idea of having onboard bullies, and not just bully, but bullies with an S, because there can be up to 7 in many cases.
Yes. And these are clever, and they also collude with one another. They can talk to the dark spirits and other people around their host. And it's true that 75% of divorce is due to spirit meddler manipulation of the couple. And the spirits and the husband and the wife collude with one another to push one another's buttons and get fights going and get tension going and recriminations, and they never let it drop. The bullying spirits, they keep reminding the host respectively of what the other person did and what they said and the cold shoulder they're getting or whatever the beef is. And that can lead to divorce, and does. 75% of them are due to this kind of ramping up of pain and suffering and anger and resentment within the people that they possess.
And I imagine that you could extend that to bosses and employees or brothers and sisters.
Absolutely.
Or any kind of close relationship between human beings can be sabotaged by onboard spirits.
Right. And you can imagine this in international geopolitics as well. World leaders sitting down to come to some sort of accommodation. It might be supported by their intentions, but blocked by spirit meddler mischief going on to try and stir up further trouble. So we're going to get into some examples of how spirit meddlers on board people even play a role in things like police shootings. The police are blamed whenever there's a shot fired and someone dies, but there's often more going on. And the spirits have a hand in this. It's fascinating. It's unbelievable, but it's true.
Indeed. Come back for the second segment, and we'll talk all about that. Be sure also to check us out at Get Wisdom, getwisdom.com, where you can check out our healing services, the Lightwork Healing Protocol, and you can do something about these dark spirit attachments. It's definitely there. You can learn about the Lightworker Healing Protocol by downloading our Lightworker Healing Protocol ebook at getwisdom.com/LHP, and we'll be right back right after this. Welcome back to the segment. We are talking about sabotage by dark spirit attachments with our topic today. Police shootings. We're going to take a look at that, Carl.
Yes, this is quite an interesting extra twist on things that people have never thought about. The dark spirits in people can push them over the edge into criminality sometimes, or acts of negligence. We talked about how they cause accidents. Well, inappropriate actions by officialdom is a kind of accident, and it's often intentional and hidden below conscious awareness of the person who carries out the deed.
Well, let's get on with it. Got a big question here. In Fort Worth, Texas. Okay. Texas, a woman was shot and killed through her bedroom window by a police officer responding to a neighbor's call stating that her front door was open. His body cam recording showed he looked around in the front through the doorway and garage, and without announcing his presence, went around to the backyard. He saw her in the upstairs window, ordered her to show her hands, but immediately fired his weapon. He'd failed apparently to make any warning announcement that he was a police officer on the scene. Was she holding a gun? Perhaps fearing there was a prowler in her backyard? What factors led to this death? And one of the karmic consequences for those involved included the next door neighbor simply wanting to be sure she was safe. We're talking about an open door.
Yes. And this is what Creator explains about what truly happened. This was an accident designed to happen and orchestrated by spirit meddlers within this police officer. They caused him to have a state of confusion, distraction, and disturbance within as a result of rising fear they instilled within the deep subconscious, sending the message his life was in danger over and over and over, and encouraging the worst possible outcome to happen by constraining things in a way that would make everyone on the scene vulnerable. The failure to announce clearly he was a police officer on the premises would naturally invite fear, hesitation, and even a self-defensive gesture on the part of the occupants of the home, with a figure prowling the backyard, even with a flashlight. This is what burglars do, after all. And in a population highly sensitized to crime and being a female home alone and having to protect a child in the bargain, fear would be understandable. And an attempt to defend the self would become an imperative. The failure to know through a warning that this was likely the policeman announcing he was there to see if everyone was all right would naturally ramp up fear, uncertainty, and make the person more vulnerable to further manipulation to worsen things by spirit attachments of her own. This, in fact, is what happened. It was a co-orchestration on the part of the spirit meddler attachments within these two human beings to create the worst possible sequence of behaviors and vulnerabilities to a rash act with a suspension of considered judgment, seemingly warranted under the circumstances, but nonetheless a fatal choice as it turned out. This is a tragedy affecting the lives of everyone involved for the worse. The young child witnessing the death of the woman must live with a memory and a poor understanding of why this came about. To see the nurturing caregiver killed outright by a government official is not a great start in life to achieve happiness and normal perspectives about one's place in society and its institutions. The police officer will have to live with guilt and self-doubt and recrimination about the lack of warning, and this will compound things for him. The neighbor, only wanting the woman's safety, must live with the knowledge his call set the tragedy in motion. So this is a hugely karmic event that will live on in the lives of all who were a part of what happened and will influence their future lives as well. The answer here is for there to be a universal awareness of this spirit element as an influence on potentially anyone, anytime, anywhere. It is no different than any other scourge that can undermine human performance, well-being, and even survival. It needs to be removed safely, effectively, and with certainty. This can be done by people using the Lightworker Healing Protocol if there had been specific prayers of protection involved to be applied for the benefit of the woman and child. There could have been a divine intervention to constrain these spirit meddler attachments and prevent the mental confusion causing just the wrong thing to happen that resulted in tragedy.
Well, that's what we're trying to do with this project, Carl. We're trying to bring awareness to this problem.
People need to do prayer work and they need to do healing work. And our Lightworker Healing Protocol is designed to remove spirit meddlers. It's the first order of business of the protocol, in fact. And it can be such a blessing to have this influence removed because you never know where and when it might strike and make a difference. You can imagine this affecting all of life. People making poor business decisions, people being grumpy or out of sorts or saying just the wrong thing to customers or clients or people that they interact with or even family members. And it's the source of evil.
Yeah.
So this is no small thing.
You know, we're learning in this project that there's basically two major causes to people's difficulties in life, whether it's illness or work or relationships or whatever. One is karma and the other is dark spirits. Karma can be a little more troublesome and difficult and long-term to resolve. But getting rid of the dark spirits, that can happen quickly. And the Lightworker Healing Protocol is really effective for that.
Yes, indeed.
U.S. Creator, an Illinois 9-year-old was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of arson and 1 count of aggravated arson after allegedly setting fire to a mobile home that killed 4 of his relatives and the mother's fiancé. The mother, who also survived the fire, said her son suffered from schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and ADHD, and took medication each morning. Why did this happen, and what is the cause of the boy's mental problems?
All right, this is quite instructive. This is what Creator says. This is a diabolical manipulation by spirit meddler attachments in this young boy to both discourage him, to make him unhappy and disenchanted with his situation, but also to suspend his feelings and react to inner instructions, encouraging him to set fire to his own home. This the boy did, not fully appreciating in terms of its permanence and the severity of the consequences. He was misled entirely by spirit meddler propaganda deep within his subconscious to give him the impression that a fire would drive away those he did not want on the premises, and had no concept it would lead to death that was irreversible. This is a diabolical manipulation in all ways by centering on such a young and vulnerable victim who in many ways became disorientated because of his spirit meddler infestation having growing control over him and wanting to darken him and create ways to interfere with his own life through his own choices. This is the major problem of spirit meddler possession, that it can begin to distort the mind. And this can lead to permanent disability with the warped perspective and delusional thinking so characteristic of psychotic disorders. It will not make sense to an outsider, but will be quite logical to the afflicted individual. As you know, diseases like schizophrenia are caused 100% by spirit meddler attachments, regardless of the mix of other potential associations, such as the genetic lineage. A high percentage of bipolar disorder is caused by spirit attachments as well. So this is a child with built-in liabilities, having been manipulated first by the extraterrestrial alliance to minimize his capabilities and encourage some negative conduct, and then having the consequences of life stress create conditions that could be exploited by bullying spirits, blaming the people themselves and encouraging wrongdoing as an answer and a way out. This tragedy is a good illustration of the ongoing ramp-up of criminality across the board to worsen society.
Boy, here we go again. Schizophrenia is 100% caused by spirit meddler attachments. Wow. We got, of course, that's probably not in the medical journals, but it should be.
It should be. It would explain a lot. And it's true of the psychotic disorders across the board as well, unless there is a physical tumor or something in the brain. So this is unappreciated. And it takes a huge, huge toll on society. And it's so unnecessary because it is a solvable and a preventable problem if there is an intervention early and often through the divine realm at the request of humans.
Yes, well, it's the request of humans that is the sticky point. U.S. Creator, a number of people have been arrested, some in possession of accelerants and other evidence, and accused of starting the wildfires in Australia. This is very timely. Are some of these people guilty, and are they just inherently would-be arsonists getting inspired, basically copycat stuff, or are they being manipulated by spirit meddler attachments to add to the carnage?
And Creator tells us the latter is very much the case. This is an orchestration, as we have shared with you, sparked by the extraterrestrial alliance as part of a worldwide effort to drag down humanity through many, many types of manipulations and degradations of function, well-being, and individual and collective failings that undermine confidence, hope for the future, and general happiness. This lowers resistance and works against any attempt to fight back. This is what they want to see happen: a softening up, a gradual erosion of confidence and wherewithal with the draining of finances through so many woundings, financially and emotionally. These individuals are being hounded and enticed, as the case may be, to join in the ongoing carnage by taking it on themselves to start fires. It takes a certain mentality to be persuaded in this way, but most people have it within the vulnerability to be pushed over the edge and ignore their normal misgivings and ethical boundaries. This is what is meant by manipulation, after all. So the individual involved is no longer acting on their own accord, but in a state of suspension with respect to their own inner beliefs and carrying out the behest of a controller, manipulating their deep subconscious from within. This is a perfect cover story and neatly explains the widespread scourge ongoing. It is outsized, and that can only be if there is some non-natural component at work. This is neatly explained by having a roundup of many humans caught in the act or with reasonable suspicion informed on, and then traceable evidence found of their involvement in setting fires. This creates a nice diversion and convenient explanation the public will likely accept if it is promoted by the media as the major source of these problems. Even a bizarre mania of fire setting among so many differing human beings can be accepted because humans are so conditioned to expect the worst of their brethren, without a deeper awareness that evil comes from inner corruption by spirit meddlers and or the extraterrestrial alliance carrying out a campaign of misdirection, faulty guidance, and even corruption of inner beliefs. The agenda remains the same, one of softening up humanity. The fact that otherwise innocent human beings are lured into being complicit only sweetens the victory to their way of thinking when humans themselves are blamed for the carnage they unleash.
You know, this example that's going on in Australia, I think is a perfect parallel to a lot of the mass shootings that are going on. And, you know, the solution that they want to roll out for the mass shootings is gun control, take all the guns away. But with this mass arson, what are they going to do, take all the matches away, Carl?
Well, this is the problem with the political solutions. They're too little, too late. You know, there's often closing the barn door after the horse is gone, the proverbial saying. And without knowing the true nature of the problem, we're just floundering around. And we're often making things worse. To have an unarmed populace when the extraterrestrials could unleash a human mercenary army to come in and just kill everyone. This is within their capability. Yeah. And everyone will be sitting ducks for a very simple, prosaic annihilation. Nothing fancy. Nothing, right. You know, superhuman in force and power, like blowing up the entire planet or something like that. So we're vulnerable to one another, and humans are being recruited to serve the darkness through criminality, through mischief, and being a wrench in the works, being a naysayer and a troublemaker and a source of pain and unhappiness. And it spreads. And all of these mass shootings are the same phenomenon. They're a manipulation.
And, you know, in the past, people saw evil as having a leader and then everybody just follows them. So like Hitler and Stalin and these guys, you know, you could just kind of pick on that one person. But nobody's leading mass shooters. Nobody's leading these arsonists. These people are being, you know, something within them is causing them to, there's no organization where people are going to meetings to decide that they're going to start setting fires in Australia. There's something beyond human going on here. And it's fairly new, you know, in terms of history. I've never seen anything like this. Have you?
Well, it's just that it's worsened. It has happened all through history. And that's true of all the follies, all the wars and the carnage that has reigned with lawlessness and pillaging of villages by marauders and all of the tribal wars that have happened. They're all instigated because humans left on their own are spiritual beings. They will naturally choose to get along with one another and live in peace. There might be disputes and points of friction, but they get resolved in a way that serves both sides in some fashion. They come to an accommodation. I guess the point I would
make with a marauder, for instance, is that at least a marauder is getting something out of the marauding, you know, pleasure or, you know, largesse or loot or whatever. But a mass shooter who goes and kills a bunch of people and then kills themselves in the process, that's hard to wrap your head around. And it's also hard to wrap your head around how so many people can go set fire in Australia. If you have half a brain, you got to know the amount of damage you're doing. How can I think there's something even worse going on these days. It's always happened, you're right, but boy, there's just something out of whack nowadays.
Well, there is a plan to have a worsening, and this is the startup.
Yes.
This is the ramp-up phase, a worsening bit by bit, getting us acclimated to more and more natural disasters, and they're hitting us again and again and again. We have wildfires on the west coast of the U.S. There are fires elsewhere in the world, and hurricanes. Oh, yeah. Again and again and again, and droughts, and blizzards, and unseasonable rains and flooding that destroy crops. This is getting worse.
Indeed it is.
Yes, and there's a purpose behind it. It's the actions of the dark.
And we'll get into that in our next segment. Be sure to come back for more Get Wisdom right after this. Welcome back to the final segment of this week's Get Wisdom. Carl, you asked creator, Dallas police officer Amber Geiger was fired from the force days after shooting and killing Gene Botham, an African-American living one floor above her, when she mistakenly walked into his apartment and thought he was an intruder. Last week, she was convicted of murder and sentenced to 10 years in prison. What was the reason for this to happen?
And this is what Creator tells us. No one knows the reason why this took place. The differing theories and the charges of racial motivation, police authoritarianism, and likelihood to lash out given the least excuse and so on are beside the point. Yes, she was a trained officer, and the training included use of firearms when there was a threat to her life underway. What truly happened was she was influenced from within by spirit meddler attachments, seeing this as an opportunity to activate within her the prior training by creating the impression as a thought within her mind. She was, in fact, seeing a life-threatening situation underway and was pushed over the edge by a growing inner panic they created by pushing all her buttons and confusing her judgment through obfuscating her thoughts. They are quite adept at suppressing restraints inherent within the being and ramping up impulsive thoughts to act, which can be reckless in some circumstances when there are no brakes and the person throws caution to the wind. That confluence of manipulations was in full force here and conspired to cause her to fire her weapon without her realizing it was truly her upstairs neighbor and not a dangerous felon. So the entire saga is a double tragedy because there were two innocent victims, not only the upstairs neighbor who was shot without having done anything wrong, but the police officer herself, whose reputation and career were shattered by what appeared to be not only a lapse of judgment, but perhaps a prejudicial racist bias coming to the foreground and thereby tarring not only her, but the police force as well. And she was left with few friends and supporters because all could find a reason to hate her for what took place. This was clearly a win for the darkness, although such wins are always temporary.
Oh, yeah, it's to say it's a win is rather disgusting, actually, but it's true. I mean, in that sense. But the justice has been miscarried in many ways because she was, I'm sure her story was, I didn't know it was him. I had no intention of doing this, and yet she was convicted of murder. At best, she should have gotten negligent manslaughter.
Yeah, that would make more sense. Yeah. It was a lapse of judgment. It was a moment of emotional overreaction, whatever, unprofessional conduct, but not, an intent to kill through racial animus or something necessarily. It's hard to prove what's in someone's mind. So one prejudice does not correct another presumed prejudice. It just
but this dovetails into the assertion here that we are really beginning to believe the worst about ourselves.
Yes.
That we're starting to really believe that the very worst possible animus that you could describe to somebody is what's actually the reality. And It's disturbing, that's for sure.
Well,
U.S. Creator,
it would be better to know that this is caused by the darkness. It is not the inherent evil of humanity. There's an overlay of manipulation going on. That's the real problem, and that deserves attention.
Absolutely. U.S. Creator, my son is now 6 years old and is in first grade. He is struggling in school and doesn't want to do homework after school. He has been very defiant, especially to me, and says he wants to kill and cut himself, only when he doesn't get his way or is really tired. This is very concerning to my wife, his mom, and I. What is the cause of these difficulties, and how can we help? You know, I just want to say that this whole cutting phenomena has always just been a mind bender for me. I've never understood it.
Well, it's caused by spirit meddler attachments. Doesn't it make sense? You've got an evil being inside of you wanting you to harm yourself, and you do. It's a manipulation from within. So this is what Creator says about this young boy. Defiant, angry, wanting to hurt himself. This is entirely due to spirit meddler manipulation to rouse anger within the boy, confusion, and create a sense of being under assault. This is enough to stir anyone up and lead them to lash out in some way in self-defense, if not reaching a level of defiance and retribution. The spirit meddlers are experts on so-called fighting words that stir the blood and get people going. This they can do even more readily in young children who are highly vulnerable, highly emotional, and lack the acculturation of good manners and self-control that are developed with maturity. So the acts of violence are common among young children for this reason. They simply cannot be expected to be perfect to begin with, and when true evil corrupts them, all bets are off in terms of what might happen.
You know, that is so true, and it's very, very difficult because, you know, the assumption is that if a child is misbehaved or is problematic, that's the fault of the parents, you know. And I know myself lots of good parents that just struggle with a very difficult child. And everything they do, it seems not to matter. It's a very difficult situation.
Yes. And it explains a lot, though, that how a very young child can be a terror, and act in evil ways. I mean, I've seen this again and again. Someone gets in touch with me and they're beside themselves. Their young kid, who's maybe 3 or 4 years old, is kicked out of their daycare because they were punching the pregnant caregiver staff member in the belly, you know, or in the mouth with a fist. You know, this sort of thing. This is not natural childhood behavior. It is an extension. It is an exacerbation of natural anger in some situations or frustration. But when they have no self-restraint and no respect for others and authority, it's often because they're being pushed over the edge.
And you know, it's not mentioned in this webinar, or in this radio show today, but I wanted to bring up that, you know, infants, the majority of really crying infants are being tormented. We've learned from dark spirit meddlers.
Well, at least 50% of the time, when babies cry for no reason, they're being tormented. Yeah,
unbelievable.
It's tragic.
U.S. Creator, the day that you did the spirit cleansing of that boy and emailed the father, he wrote back, "Strangely, in a good way, my son has been more cooperative today. His behavior this morning was awful, but improved noticeably later on in the day and evening. Can you briefly summarize what type of attachments we both had to cause us to clash so badly? What can we share with him about our clearing session done that day?"
All right, and Creator points out something very interesting here. This was an interesting situation where both parties were the victim of spirit attachments who were acting in collusion. So wanting to get the maximum amount of energy on both ends of the arrangement, these spirits conspired with one another to encourage defiant behavior in the boy, knowing it would upset the father, and in turn caused a backlash against the boy, at least perceived as a backlash, being in a heightened state of torment and sensitivity and desperately needing relief. So neither the boy nor the father are at fault here. They were doing their best to hold the line and find a way to cope with inner feelings. This is quite difficult when the person has no idea what is truly happening and is compelled to react to their own emotions by virtue of being human and designed to do so. This active collaboration is a very common feature that assists the darkness when spirits collude with one another while occupying different hosts who may be interacting. And this can have quite extreme consequences at times to get arguments going and have fights break out, and even at times leading to a killing in susceptible individuals who cannot control their emotions sufficiently to prevent such a tragedy. But this is a frequent cause of violence across the board, having spirits on board and wanting their host to suffer.
Wow, yeah. We've all heard of like really unbelievable stories about how somebody gets killed over, the cap being left off the toothpaste or something,
That's right. I told him if he turned the channel one more time,
Right.
I was going to clock him, and I did, that kind of thing. This adds a new dimension to explain the true mechanism.
Yes, it does. Carl, you asked Creator, a client asks, there was an entire year when I was about 4, perhaps 5, but not yet in school, that I could not shake the thought that my mother was trying to poison me. What was the reason?
All right, and this is what Creator explains. This was a reawakening within you of a memory from the Akashic records of a past life experience where this experience did happen to you. But it is not relevant to the current lifetime, other than the possibility it can be dredged up. And then the reminder is used to cause emotional harm, and that was the purpose here. You had spirit attachments wishing to torment you, and what they will do is look for the biggest traumas you've experienced and bring them into your awareness within the deep level of the mind, and then taunt you further and ridicule and question your capability and other attributes on display. And few can stand up to the level of negativity of what can happen when the mind is commandeered in this fashion and someone else is giving the orders and how things need to be acted out. So here we go again.
Yep.
The collusion of dark spirits.
Yeah, it's a wake-up call that people really need to understand what kind of an effect these have. And it affects everybody. And if it's not affecting you directly, it's affecting the people around you, which is affecting you indirectly.
Yes, we're all victims of this. This is where crime comes from, as well as, human misery, human selfishness. Think about that. There's a lot of things short of criminality that just aren't right. They're not moral or ethical, but they happen all the time.
Greed, all the negative emotions certainly play into that. In what percentage of suicides are spirit meddler attachments a major causal factor? That's what you asked Creator.
And Creator tells us this occurs in more than 90%. And the reason is that humans do have an aversion to suicide, knowing deep within it is non-divine. And the urge to be on the divine path is not served by taking the life. And so this, I think, puts in perspective how these beings can cause an extreme circumstance. We're talking earlier about people killing others. And this doesn't exclude the possibility of killing oneself, right. Cutting behavior and that sort of thing. That's a mild sort of torture, self-torture. But drinking poison or jumping out of a high window or impulsively jumping in front of a car, things people do every day. This is often the result of an inner impulse caused by dark spirit attachments, more than 90% of the time.
Wow. That means, that's horrible news, but there's hope because those attachments can be removed relatively quickly and easily with the Lightworker Healing Protocol.
Absolutely. That's why we're talking to you about all this gory, dark, depressing stuff. There is an answer, but there needs to be an awareness of the problem and its solution. And that's what we want people to appreciate and to help us by spreading the word.
And the best way that you can help yourself or somebody else is engaging our healing services. You can check them out at getwisdom.com. We have the healing tab on our menu. You can get a personal clearing as well as property clearings, animal clearings. All these services are available. Please check them out at getwisdom.com. Well, we're out of time for this show again, Carl, but thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Be well, everybody.